Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I hope I live up to it. Before I start, I wanted to thank everyone at the EPIC team. And as in the introduction it was mentioned, I've got a few different geographies in my background. And someone asked me, what do you call home? And I think for me, I'm a global citizen who calls New Zealand home. And I think that as a theme for a lot of the people here who have different diversities in their ethnicities, in their backgrounds, I think if we can all embrace that we are the sum and compound of the different experiences, the different ethnicities that we have within us, but we've chosen to make New Zealand home, I think that's really important. With that, well, I thought I'd start the conversation with the question, or the answer to the question, how did I get here? And I don't mean this in a very sort of philosophical or metaphorical way. I mean this in a very literal way. Why am I here, or how am I here speaking at the EPIC New Zealand conference? And so just a little bit of history into that, starting with the way of the New Zealand map, or the map of the world should be. So these are my parents. They're originally from India. And at some point in their career, my dad decided that he wanted to move to the Middle East. In Oman, he's in the oil industry. So he moves with my mom to the Middle East. And then they have the little two children of me and my brother. And along the way, we meet a wonderful family in Oman, a Mr. and Mrs. Sathu, who become very close family friends of ours over the years. And as my parents were considering emigrating into New Zealand, Mr. and Mrs. Sathu say, well, you should go check the country out and, meet our brother who lives there. And so, this was in 1995. I was 14. And so we go to New Zealand, we visit Mr. Sathu's brother and his children. And, we have a fantastic time. We realized we loved New Zealand. My parents loved it. I decided I wanted to come here for university. And, this is me here in New Zealand, moved to Boston, moved to San Francisco. And then a few months ago, Anukul, the son of the brother of the friend of my parents, reaches out to me. He works with the Office of Ethnic Affairs here in New Zealand and says, Priv, would you like to come and speak at the EPIC New Zealand conference? And I narrate this story just to highlight exactly what we're talking about. This journey has spanned, if that arrow doesn't clarify it, the world. And it's taken the power of these connections and these different diversities and us essentially converging here in New Zealand for me to be here today. And I actually think that the power of connections has been the story of my life. And sort of diving a little bit deeper into that story, because hopefully that conveys how important this has been for me personally, and I hope everyone here recognizes the potential and the value of these connections that you can build. I want to sort of spend a little bit of time, actually now more philosophically and metaphorically, talking about how I've gotten here. So, as I said, I moved here to New Zealand as was said, when I was 16. Came here for undergrad, and it was a great experience, but I still didn't feel through the 3.5 years of my undergrad experience that New Zealand was really home. And, I did my undergrad, went on to started my PhD with Professor Gluckman in neuroscience, which was fantastic. Somewhere along the way, again, very serendipitously, the actual stories, and I don't know if I've said this before, I lived in O'Rourke, which is the university hostel for just here on, just across from Simon Street. And I missed dinner. And so somebody said there's a postgraduate student association meeting where they're going to have some food. Do you want to show up? So I'm like, well, I've missed dinner. I'm going to keep myself open to new opportunities and new people. And so I turn up and I meet Mr. Jeff Witcher, who's my guest here today. And that cascaded a series of events that led to the creation of Spark, the University of Auckland Entrepreneurship Challenge. And what I realized through that experience, and this is really important, that the reason I didn't feel New Zealand was home until that point where I started Spark was because I hadn't engaged with the community. It was a choice I hadn't made. And it was that engagement and that feeling of contribution back to the community and the society that we live in that is really important for embracing and getting involved and making a place home. And so when that had happened, Spark sort of obviously over the last decade has gone on to become a leading transformational source of creating an entrepreneurial spirit in the University of Auckland, but broadly amongst Kiwis, with the mission, and this was something I think the minister touched on. I think it's important, and this is what Spark strives for, is for all of us as New Zealanders not to see ourselves as engineers or doctors or mathematicians or musicians. It's more important for each of us to see ourselves as key drivers for the growth of New Zealand's economy. And I think that's central if we have to grow as a nation and move up within the OECD indices as a place where people want to continue to live in and have an improved standard of living. So through the Spark journey, eventually, decided that I loved science, but what I really enjoyed was commercializing science and taking a kernel of an idea and creating something that was valuable for a greater community and a greater society. And decided business school would be a great place to build networks and learn some of these concepts in more detail. So went to business school at Harvard, and over there what was interesting was that I had a great access to networks, but what became really important, and I touch on this a little bit later, was connections. And again, I'll get into this, but I think it's important to recognize these are two very different things. Connections are what you make with individuals. These are really powerful, and networks are the access to the diaspora of people through those connections. But your networks are only as powerful as your connections. So it's more important to have a few strong connections than large access to networks. And again, I think that's another theme I want to highlight. So while all of my friends and colleagues at business school were busy accessing massive networks within Harvard, I chose to capitalize on a connection that I'd made, again, through Jeff, to a gentleman called Colin South, a Kiwi, who had been with Via Lactea before and then went on to start a company called Mascoma. It was a clean energy company, made biofuels, funded by top venture capitalists in the US. And it was, again, through that I met a gentleman called Vinod Khosla, who introduced me to Sean Simpson, also a Kiwi, who has a company called Lanzatech, and I headed up their international business development. And through that journey, I sort of had multiple sort of startup exposures and experiences, but again, interestingly, again, very serendipitously, a friend that I'd made through my Spark journey, Sina Rijal, who'd come from Cambridge to help us really sort of learn from the Cambridge experience towards building Spark, he introduced me to a friend who then got me connected to the Singularity Network. Singularity University is an institution started by Google and NASA to promote innovation and entrepreneurship, and I was one of the faculty there. And through that, I met my co-founder with whom I started Blue Oak. So all of this really long-winded, circuitous way to say that it really, I wish I could say that everything I'm doing today was something I planned when I was 6 years old, but it wasn't. It really has been the ability that I've been fortunate to have to keep my mind and eyes open to new opportunities and new connections, and been fortunate to then access the networks that come from those connections. And through all of that, I mean, things that, just as a quick update on business, we've been really fortunate in securing multiple rounds of financing and now working towards building the first precious metal refinery in the US that would be able to take electronic waste streams and make gold, silver, and copper out of these waste streams, which would be a significant milestone for us. But tying all of this together, I think what's really important is that powerful connections traverse huge distances and geographies, huge sort of time lapses and generations even, and huge diversity and ethnicity. And I think it behooves the people to make sure that they can nurture these strong connections with utmost authenticity. I think one of the things I know my Kiwi friends at business school found really hard was just this concept of networking. It was sort of this burden that you had to turn up somewhere and you had to turn your charisma switch on and you had to talk to all of these people. It's exhausting, but it's only exhausting if you treat it as a transactional relationship, which is aimed at building these massive networks. The moment you move it away from transactional relationships and access to networks to building authentic, strong connections and meaningful connections, I think that's the differentiator. So for me, when I'm at any one of these events, if I can meet one or two people who I really connect with, that's a success. I do not try to meet like as many people and go on this speed dating, executive speed dating thing. I cannot stand it. And I think that sort of gets lost when people feel like they have to access this plethora of human networks. I don't think that really works. And I think that sort of, these are a few words of caution, because I think, we're working towards building powerful connections, but, let's not be overwhelmed by trying to access significant networks. Let's focus on meeting people who you actually really meaningfully connect to, because those are the people that'll carry you forward and will look out for you 5, 10, 15 years later and make sure that they're doing everything they can to take you forward. So what does all of this mean for New Zealand businesses? And I know we've had a lot of conversation about, there's 4 million plus people here in New Zealand, but what that also means when we talk about 1 million plus people or 1 million plus Kiwis overseas is that we have 1 million plus Kiwi business development team. That's what it means. People always ask me, Priv, how are you contributing back to New Zealand? You don't even live here. And I feel like in my own way, the access to my connections is the best that I can do for New Zealand in my own way, which is not to say that, everyone leaves New Zealand. I think there's a blend, a really powerful blend that we have the opportunity to access. The people who are here, who are working hard to get New Zealand moving upwards in the economic trajectory, and people who are overseas who are waiting with open arms to help in any way they can to take New Zealand to the forefront of the world. But in addition to the 1 million plus Kiwis that are living overseas, by embracing multi-ethnic interconnectivity, you have access to hundreds of millions of people across diversities, across countries, across nationalities. And I think that's the kind of access that we can create through building powerful connections. And what's really important there is, and this sort of to sum up the conversation here, is that we keep our minds open and are ready to engage. I think that's really important. This isn't about, I'm from India and grew up in Oman. This is about, as I said, I'm a global citizen who's had the good fortune of embracing experiences from Oman and India and has made a decision to call New Zealand home. And I'm going to tie all of those experiences back in helping me and my company and my community succeed. And if each of us can take that attitude of open-mindedness, a proclivity to engage with people around you and in the communities around you, and really step out of your comfort zone and say that, yes, it's okay to go to this new event or this new opportunity, not because you're going to be overwhelmed by 500 people who you don't know and now you feel this pressure to network, but because you might meet 2 or 3 people who are going to be really strong connections who will help you take your business and your futures forward. With that, thank you very much, and I'd love to open this up into a conversation because I know we have some time left to take questions. Thank you.